Welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope, this time for September 26th through October 2nd of 2022. My name is Cam White, and let's talk about the highlights we have going on this week. This week is looking pretty awesome, as you could probably tell by the thumbnail that I made. We have a lot of highlights this week. Number one, Mercury is going to be conjoining Venus. We talked about last week Mercury going back into Virgo, and it completes its conjunction to Venus here starting this week. Then we have Mars trine Saturn. Like I said last week, this is one of the most constructive transits that we have. I'm very thankful that this Mars retrograde will be trining Saturn this whole time. So there's a lot of constructive energy going into this week. Venus enters Libra. This is, again, like I said last week, this is a really good week if you're waiting for when are things going to get good. This isn't a time when things are going to get really good. Venus going into Libra, going into her home sign, is going to make it easier to enjoy things, have fun. We'll talk more about that. Venus actually goes opposite Jupiter, which is like, in my opinion, expanding the fun and, going full out with it. So that's really exciting. Mercury stations direct to end this week off, which is also really exciting because now that we're done with the Mercury retrograde, when Mercury was in shadow, we had some things come up. Mercury goes retrograde. We figured out what was different, what was wrong, what we had to rethink and re-strategize about. And once Mercury goes direct in Virgo, this is when the solutions become clear, and then we can move forward again with a better mindset. The one thing that I'm not going to talk about in any specific day, but this week we have the Saturn-Uranus square happening by less than a degree. So there is a theme of this week that is very unstable, that is very all over the place. The Saturn-Uranus square has had to deal with energy prices being fluctuating, the supply chain crisis. All of these things that you've seen go wrong has really been the Saturn-Uranus square. So we have a lot of that energy going this week of things that are usually fixated, that are usually stable, not necessarily being stable. So that will be something to deal with. It won't necessarily be the funnest thing ever, but everything else is looking great. So let's go ahead and get started with it. So we're starting Monday off with Mercury conjoining Venus. What I like about this is that it's trining Pluto. So as Mercury is, applying to Venus here and conjoins it, this is a lot of solutions. This is a lot of clarity. This is a lot of, our minds, and the information that we're receiving is in alignment with our values. And it trines Pluto. I don't typically talk about Pluto, well, at least especially for trines to Pluto, but I find this very empowering. I find this very impactful. But the other thing that's going on Monday is we're going to be having the moon make a trine to Mars and Saturn as it's in Libra, fresh off that new moon. So Monday looks really constructive as far as getting off of this new moon, right? We just had the new moon in Libra, like I said, getting things rebalanced, getting things reset, ready for the fall. This moon's going to be here trining Mars and Saturn all day. The moon's in Libra. We're talking about our feelings, our emotions, our day-to-day. And as it's in Libra, we're just looking for balance. We're just looking for peace. We're just looking for harmony. Whether that's, this way and that way, it's just about getting I don't want to say the recipe right, but just getting the balance right. The moon's playing into Mars. So we're talking about our action, what we're doing, what we're, going for. It's trining Saturn. This is very constructive. This is good for long-term stuff. And I think as Mercury's conjoining Venus right here, the solutions are very clear. Venus is still in Virgo, where we might be hypercritical of the things that we're doing. We may be hypercritical over pleasure, enjoyment, fun. But I think as Mercury conjoins Venus, it's like, if you are playing a game and you think you have a bunch of beliefs that's like, I'm stupid and I'm not good enough. But if you just go out of your way to maybe learn the rules of the game, maybe you can have a little bit more fun. It's never fun when you don't understand a game, which is very Venus and Virgo. Like, it's hard to understand, or it's hard to have fun when you don't understand it. But Mercury conjoining Venus is, again, finding that solution, gaining a lot of clarity around it. And I love that for this new moon in Libra, right? This is now a fresh moon. It's going to start waxing here pretty soon. So this all looks really, really good. And the fact that Mercury and Venus are trining Pluto offers a lot of power. Unfortunately, Pluto can deal with fear. And of course, fear comes up a lot in today's society. But I believe as Mercury's conjoining Venus, making that trine to Pluto, there's something extremely powerful about, realizing what these solutions are. Now, it is Pluto. It can be kind of intimidating and it can be scary, but there is power in knowledge. You just have to apply it. And I think that's also a lot of what Mars and Gemini is like applying the knowledge, applying the information that you have rather than just letting it go to waste. So then we get to Tuesday. And really, the only thing on Tuesday is the moon's going to be void in Scorpio. If you're not familiar with what a void moon is that it's not really making any aspects to anything. It's just kind of hanging out there. So Tuesday, we'll have the moon pretty much hanging out in Libra, not doing much. It'll be pretty chill, and then everything changes later on in the evening. As you can see, the sun is starting to set here. The moon goes into Scorpio. And I've been kind of a broken record about the moon in Scorpio, especially as the South Node is there, is that like, it's this gut-wrenching feeling. It's this like heart sinking into your stomach kind of feeling. And this is where the uncomfortable stuff kind of comes up. Luckily, there's not like a lot of hardcore transits that are happening that are like, that would give you a reason to look at this moon in Scorpio differently. But maybe the way I would look at it is the fact that this is a fresh moon, the fact that this is now a waxing moon. Maybe we're initiating and starting things that might cause us to be a little bit scared. And I think as the moon goes into Scorpio, this is going to be that gut-wrenching feeling of like, oh man, I'm doing this. The moon in Scorpio, you know, lacks comfortability. And so maybe this would be a good time to get out of your comfort zone for certain things. Because if you're looking for that comfort and if you're looking for protection, the moon in Scorpio doesn't offer that. And I think the moon in Scorpio offers much more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to use purge because we'll be talking about that on Wednesday, but it's much more of like, if you have to do something that requires you to get very emotionally invested and that those emotions are going to be very gnarly, but you need to uproot it, Tuesday's a great day to start that. Like if you're starting something new that requires you to kind of go through a quote unquote transformation process and requires you to really like get into the guttural levels of how you feel about things, that's what Tuesday's about. So Tuesday's kind of getting like, you know, the moon in Scorpio is really focused on pain, right? Like the moon's our emotions and our feelings, and Scorpio is like literal pain. So I think we might be upset about things in the past, things about how we're feeling right now, but this is not necessarily like the astrology doesn't really attest to like things are horrible, but this moon in Scorpio might be like, you know, as you're doing new things and having new things go on, you might reflect on the past and be like, why was it this way? And if it wasn't for that way, I wouldn't have to be doing this right now. And you kind of just have to get the fuck over it, to be honest with you. There's nothing I can really say about that. You got to move on from the past. You got to let it go. And the moon in Scorpio is an awesome time to let it go. Again, that doesn't happen until later on in the evening. So most of Tuesday is just going to be like, everything's nice, everything's balanced, everything's fair with the moon void in Libra. And then it goes into Scorpio and things are going to get a little bit upsetting. So as we go into Wednesday's when things will look really good, in my opinion. Well, depending on who you ask. I really like this Mars trine Saturn, right? The reason why I like this is, number one, the debates that we're having in this country. Like I said before, I made a 2022 year ahead horoscope back in like August of 2021, and I talked about Mars and Geminis when we're going to be debating all of these facts around, you know, the COVID lockdowns, all of that fun stuff. And why I said that is with Mars and Gemini, right? We're arguing, we're debating with our words. But if that's going against like establishment and institution, like if it was Mars square Saturn, it would be going nowhere fast. But Saturn being about, you know, authorities, systems, regulations, and it's in the sign of the people of Aquarius. This is at least the arguments being heard and not just necessarily dismissed, which I think I see a lot more of coming up here. But what I see really powerful about Mars trine Saturn is, you know, for example, I mean, I can only really use myself as an example for this, but I'm really working on my back end. I'm going to slowly be getting off Patreon, doing memberships all on my website. I'm doing a lot of back end technical stuff that will refortify my back end system. And that's a very powerful thing for me. You know, I rely on tech and I rely on a lot of these platforms for my business. And I have found myself in a position where if anything were to happen to me, I could lose it all. So I'm at a point where I'm having to do the back end reconstruction of everything to where I can have a sustainable business model using tech platforms without having to worry about, you know, censorship or anything else. And I like Mars trine Saturn for literally like technical detail around information. I mean, Saturn in Aquarius is very internet. The internet started with Saturn in Aquarius, and, you know, we're in the, you know, Saturn return of the internet right now. But Mars trine Saturn is really good for, you know, Mars is energy, drive, action, ambition. Saturn is long-term commitment, you know, literal systems, regulation, authorities. And so as Mars is trine Saturn, these two energies are working together with one another. But the hard part is the moon's going to be conjoining the South Node. And this is why I said maybe purge isn't the right word. That's more an appropriate word for Wednesday. What I don't like about Wednesday is that, yeah, the moon's going to be on the South Node in Scorpio. There are going to be some things that you have to let go of that aren't necessarily easy. You know, pain and trauma are literally stored in the body. And same thing with resentment and any negative energy. If you don't expel that negative energy gets trapped in your body and it finds other ways to get released, whether that's through a disease, whether that's from you acting out. But as the moon conjoins the south node, there's this realization of like, this has to go. Mars is trining Saturn, where there is a long-term effort to do something constructive, right? Mars in Gemini is, Mars is action, right? It's an immutable sign, so we're changing, we're adapting, we might be doing two things, and Mars is eventually going to retrograde, and we'll be going back over this, and there will be a better way to focus. Like Mars in Gemini is very distracted. Mars in Gemini retrograde will be, very distracted by both ways and might need to gain a little bit of focus. But as Mars trines Saturn, there's something about doing these changes that are good for the long term. And I think as you do these changes, as you progress along that path, you're going to get to a point where, I don't have a good example of this in my head, but it's kind of like, have you ever done something that you thought you couldn't do, but then you did it and you were so used to doing it that there was a moment where you realized that there was a time that you didn't think you can do it? I really don't have a good example of this off the top of my head. But what I would relate this to is doing something that is good for you and that you can do, but in that moment realizing that this wasn't always the way that it was. I think as that moon conjoins the south node in Scorpio is like, for example, with me, I've been very broke my whole life. I mean, like, it was not easy being a YouTuber at first. I did this for years without really making any money. And I remember, making some of the purchase and just even paying my bills. And it got to this point where it was normalized for me, where I was like, okay, I'm able to take care of myself now. Because there was a long time I couldn't. Donating plasma all of the time and fucking living literally off pennies I'd fucking find on the ground just to get a fucking cigarette. Not being able to feed myself, not being able to pay my fucking bills. And, it wasn't that long ago where, when I actually started getting better at this job and having a lot more success with it, and I was able to make some of these purchases that would help increase my business. And I just remember there was a moment where it was really crazy to me that I might have old money programs come back up. I might have old fears around money and old scarcity programs that might come up. And I feel like that's one of these days here where you might be doing something that is good for you, that you can do, but it's going to trigger all of those fears. It's going to trigger all of that bullshit that you have, underneath everything. And you can't let that hold yourself back. Like sometimes, the Scorpio stuff is very comfort zone. And this looks like a lot of getting out of your comfort zone for something that is good for you. So it doesn't necessarily look bad, but you might have a realization that, you've held on to an unhealthy attachment, an unhealthy belief. The moon in Scorpio is so like, when you experience pain and when you experience these traumatic situations and you hold on to that because that's your story, right? There's victimization, right? We're all victims of something, but then there's the victim story, which is the story you tell yourself about your victim situation. And this is where I used to say this stuff on Twitter, and people used to get so pissed off about this. We're all victims here. But if you allow your victimization to narrate your life story, you're fucking yourself over. And in fact, you're disempowering yourself and you're not serving other people around you. That victim story that feels comfortable, that feels safe, is the thing that's holding you back. And you can be a victim all day long, but if you play that card, then you're going to get that reality. If you just think that you're a victim, well, guess what? Life's not in your control. And guess what? You are at the mercy of whatever the fuck is coming your way, because you sure as shit ain't going to do shit about it. So there might be this moment on Wednesday where, you might have to get over that story. And it's not easy. None of this stuff is easy, by the way. Like, I really get frustrated when people are like, oh, well, I was a victim and blah, 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 blah. It's like, especially, I love making fun of my followers that are Americans, because no matter how bad you had it here, someone else in the world has it 10,000 times worse than you. And that's not to diminish your problem. But if that person can overcome it and be greater than, they thought that they can be, you sure as shit can. And I really look at this as like, this is good. This is constructive. But in those moments where you push yourself past what you thought you could do, comes a breakthrough that is not easy to deal with. Like, your body is going to respond to your brain saying, no, this goes against my belief. I can't do this. I can't do this. But when you actually do it, you're literally rewriting the programs in your brain, the neurological pathways in your brain. And this is one of those days where it's like you're rewriting that, and that's going to be painful. But that's a part of the story, It's same thing with like in the military and in boot camp. There's a lot of things that those guys have to go through where it's going to destroy the old ways of beliefs that they had about themselves. And it's not that they can't do it. It's just that, are they willing to let that story go? Are they willing to let their own limitations dissolve for what they know if they just stick to the program, stick to the training, that they can do it? So I really look at Wednesday as you're going to have to let go of some old limiting beliefs and things that don't serve you. And it might come up in I don't want to say an emergency way, but in the mid, have you ever just done something that you never thought you could do and you just did it and it was no thing, but then you realized what you did and you started crying? This is one of those things where it's just going to be it's going to be a rough day, but not rough because life is hard. It's going to be rough because life is good. But it just is going to challenge your conception to everything. And so I would really let yourself go through the experience. Don't rob yourself of that pain. Pain is a good thing. Pain is a good thing to experience. I don't want to say suffering is a good thing to experience, but there is no desire in life without suffering. And I really believe this is a day to feel that, right? When you have to completely, let's say you had a fucked up childhood, your parents didn't do shit for you, they gave you zero tools, but you still had to be the grown up and you still had to do the fucking damn thing that they wouldn't do for you. There's moments where it hurts. Like, it hurts to be the bigger person. And this is one of those days, but don't just fucking ignore that. Like, feel that. That's real energy. And that's energy that can push you forward into many other avenues. So while the moon's on top of the south node, yeah, it's going to suck. And I could sit here and tell you, oh, it's going to be emotional. Or you could sit in that. Like, really sit in it. Like, something I like if you're feeling miserable and shitty, if you just avoid it, you're never going to actually confront the reason why you feel shitty. Versus if you sit in your shit, if you sit in your depression and you really go like, wow, I'm here, that's going to be the pathway that leads you to that breakthrough of, I can do this, I can get over this, and I can change that. But it takes you sitting in that pain and sitting in that resentment. And that's just what I think a lot of this is here. So Wednesday's going to be a little tough, but I think you guys can do it. Especially while Mars is trining Saturn. You know that this is for the long term. You know that this is for the good. So just push through. We get to Thursday. And on Thursday here, the moon's going to be going opposite Uranus, and it's going to square Saturn. It doesn't get easier as far as the emotional part of it. Venus enters Libra, which I really, really love. I think with Venus going into Libra, things get easier. I know I just said that things don't get easier here. But the way I would address this is the moon opposite, well, let's just pull up the chart here. There we go. So as the moon goes opposite Uranus, right, like, you can't expect everything to go your way, as we've learned this year, and the moon's going to go opposite Uranus and then immediately square Saturn. And I said this maybe a week or two ago, but you're going to hit walls, and it's your choice whether or not you let that wall be the end-all, be-all, or if you just choose to look at it as an obstacle to get around. I would really recommend looking at this day as an obstacle. And I think the obstacle is just going to be like, again, that narrative that you tell yourself. Because at the other side of that wall, the moon sextiles Mercury. Mercury's retrograde in Virgo, and it's opposite Neptune here. The wall is just an illusion. That's not real. And Mercury is retrograde in Virgo, where we're going, oh, I let myself, I took in the data and I said, that's a wall, I can't go over that. But Mercury's retrograde, we're seeing things differently right now. Mercury's retrograde in Virgo, and a really strong sign. And I think as that moon's in Scorpio, sextiling Mercury in Virgo, if you allow yourself to overcome those fears, and if you overcome that gut-wrenching feeling, there is a peace on the other side of this. There's a moment where you go, wow, I overcame that. Wow, I looked at that differently. Wow, this, when you go through one obstacle, if you have a wall in front of you that you feel like you can't go around, the second you get around that wall, everything else becomes easier. Because then you go, well, I can go over that wall. Now I can do this and I can do that. And so on Thursday, as the moon goes opposite Uranus and square Saturn, you're going to have a wrench thrown. It's going to be, nothing's ever going to go your way. You're always going to get challenged. And this is more so a day to say, hey, that's going to hurt. It's going to not feel good, but you can go around it. There are solutions on the other side. And Venus enters Libra. The weight of the stress goes away. Because with Venus and Libra, Venus is about fun, pleasure, romance, connection. And as she goes into Libra, it's her home sign. It's just relating to people, being peaceful together and connecting with one another. Venus is combust, so it's not going to be necessarily, easy. When a planet is combust, that means it's close to the sun here within 10 degrees. And so those topics become, Venus is going to have a Cazimi here soon. So she's going through this process of change, this process of, getting rid of things and moving on from things. And I believe as Venus goes into Libra, I just think everything gets a little bit easier. Venus goes into Libra before all of this. So I think that might help with the moon and Scorpio stuff. But the moon and Scorpio stuff is going to be a little bit rough. You're just going to hit a wall, and you've got to be the one that you could sit there and be like, I can't go around this wall, and then you're just going to be pouting and sitting like a little crybaby for the rest of Thursday. And it's then that totally changes the subject when we get to Friday, because when the moon goes into Sagittarius, which we'll talk about here in a second, if you're just going to sit and pout and stay in your bullshit, then the moon in Sagittarius is you're just going to avoid everything. You're just going to avoid this, avoid that, and it's not your fault because you're just a victim, and nothing's ever your fault. It's always everyone else. It can't be you. Why would your problems in life be your fault? Something I love about astrology is that it really puts the personal responsibility on you. We all have shitty charts. I have clients that are like, oh, this is the worst chart you've ever seen. No, it's not. You should be fucking grateful for the chart that you have, because trust me, there's some bad charts out there that you have no idea what people have to go through. And I bring up the personal responsibility thing because the chart gives us a map as to what tools that we have in our backpack to overcome the circumstances we've been given. And if you're just going to blame it all on the astrology, if you're going to blame it all on everybody else but you, you're never going to get anywhere, and you're never actually going to be happy. Or you can take that negative energy and transmute it into I am powerful enough, and take that personal responsibility. Society doesn't tell us to do that. The world doesn't tell us to do that. They say, it's not your fault. Be comfortable, be victim. And then, of course, you spiral because there's all these problems in life that you can't solve. Versus every problem in your life you can solve if you just take responsibility over it. You can't fix or change how people treat you or what things happen to you, but you can fix and change the way that you respond to it. This is one of those times of if it's to be, it's up to me. So I know I just probably pissed off a lot of you guys there. And again, if you got a victim story and you've been victimized, we've all been victimized. But it's really dependent on how much you let that victim story narrate your life. Because if your whole life story is just, well, I'm a victim, well, then the rest of your life is going to look like being a victim. And it fucking sucks. Why would you want to be a victim? Why would you want that? Well, it's comfortable, it's safe, and it makes sense. But you don't get what you want. You're not happy. So you could get over the victim story. It feels good. It makes you feel validated. It makes you feel important and special. Or you can say, hey, yeah, I've been victimized before, but I didn't let that shit affect me. I didn't let this breakup affect me. I didn't let losing my job affect me. I didn't let whatever fucking horrible things you guys have gone through. It's really crazy, the stories I hear that people go through. And I just, my heart goes out to so many, like, you guys have been through so much fucking shit. And I mean, you're still here. And I think this idea of letting all of the shit you've been through weigh you down versus not realizing that you've been through all of this shit and that you're still here and still kicking it, I think is a disservice to you and people around you. Because when you are, less in energy, when you are taking from people, like when you are not being your true self, when you are not living in that empowered state, you're taking away from other people. It's actually really selfish. Versus if you get over your shit and you be the best version of you that you can, you get to give to other people. And it's not about you. I've said this before in my podcast. It's really not about you. Your astrology chart even talks about it. It's not always about you. There are other people in your life that you affect. And if you are so down on yourself and so stuck in your victim story, you're going to just take everyone down with you. Versus if you be the change that you want to see, you be that difference, you get to uplift everybody, and then they come along the ride with you then. And that brings us to Friday. Because Friday, the moon goes into Sagittarius. It sextiles Venus. It trines Jupiter. Friday is two streets. If you sat in your bullshit with the moon in Scorpio, you're avoiding stuff. You're going back to the you're just going to be avoiding shit, really. Or if you go through it, this is going to feel like some freedom. Some real like, wow, I can change my beliefs. Wow, I can change my reality. The moon enters Sagittarius very late Thursday. And then we'll be transiting early Sagittarius very late or very early Friday morning. The moon's going to, again, sextile Venus. This is like, it's moon and Sag, right? Fun, exploration, adventure, philosophy, big dreams. It's sextiling Venus. There's the sense of like, I can connect this. I can bring this together. I have my resources. I have my valuables together. Then the moon takes Venus's light and transfers it over to Jupiter, where there's the sense of, again, and I talked about this last week, sometimes we need people. Right? Like relationships are very important. We're very relationship-oriented people. And as that moon sextiles Venus, that is having that support, that is having that, value in a relationship there to support you. And then the moon starts to trine Jupiter. The high of overcoming something that you didn't think you can overcome is a greater sense of feeling than the comfort of staying in your bullshit. And this is one of those days where when you overcome that, like, the sky's the limit. I think as the moon trines Jupiter all day long, and then, it will go opposite Mars later. We'll talk about that on Saturday. That's got its own issues. But the moon trining Jupiter is like, Jupiter's only in Aries for so long. It's going to go back into Pisces in October, November, and December. And then in January of 2023, it'll go back into Aries. And we're going to get, 4 months of Jupiter in Aries before it goes into Taurus forever. We only have so much time. Jupiter is about faith, belief, optimism. It's in Aries, the sign of the self. If you needed a clearly the universe is saying this is a time to if you need to be the warrior, if you need to charge, if you need to be greater than you think you are now, this is the time. This is the time where the cup comes around to you and pours into your cup. Fucking don't miss that opportunity. Really. I think Friday's great. And I think after the moon trines Jupiter, there's just there's endless possibilities. Now, what gets tricky is when we get to Saturday and the moon, it'll make it trine to Saturn, which is nice, but it'll go opposite Mars. Venus will also go opposite Jupiter. The moon will square Mercury and Neptune. This is when it gets a little bit convoluted. This is fine. I'm going to explain this, but really use that Friday energy. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that, so the moon will trine Saturn, right? It'll trine Saturn. There's we're feeling connected. We're feeling like this is long term. The moon in Sag, though, opposite Mars and Gemini, you can't get distracted. Mars and Gemini wants to do two things. Mars and Gemini wants to be here and there and left and right. And this is really where I think the hard part about this week comes up is that moon in Sag has all these big dreams, but how do I do this? How do I do that? I got to go here. I got to go there. Motherfucker, take a breath. We have 6 more months of Mars and Gemini. You have all the time in the world to get it all done. If you're trying to get it all done tomorrow, it's not going to work. Do what you can and what's in front of you. Let me go back to the sheet real quick. Because as the moon trines Saturn, again, moon in Sagittarius, all of that explosive optimism is going to be really constructive for any long-term plans that you have. But then it goes opposite Mars where it's like, well, do I do this or do I do that? And then you're going to get caught up in that. Venus goes opposite Jupiter, which is a whole nother story. This is exciting. Venus, a lot of this is relationship energy, right? Venus in Libra is very sexy and very magnetic, and Jupiter in Aries is very well, I'll fucking, it's Jupiter, we've all hit on someone out of our league, and we've all been surprised by how that goes. This is one of those days, if you got someone around you that's out of your league that you want to hit on, you better be Jupiter in Aries and you better be funny. You better be very confident about it. But this is the only problem I have with this is that it's an opposition. So our ability, our want, and our desire to connect and to relate is going against our Jupiter and Aries. It just has to be me and it has to be independent and self-serving. And this is, and Jupiter's retrograde, so this is much more of a time to focus on other people, focus on the relationships, focus on the other people involved, maybe not necessarily worry about yourself because givers gain. If you have never read the book, The Go-Giver, please read that book. It is a very short read. You can read it in a day. It's so transformational But the idea is you're either a giver and a taker in life. Not that that's like a black and white binary, because we're both at the same time, but givers gain. If you're worried about yourself here, you're not going to get it. Versus if you take the self out of it, which is also very Jupiter, and you focus on the other people, you're going to get that reward. You will gain from that. I don't want to say self-sacrifice, but that sense of focusing on what other people's needs and desires are first before yourself, you will get that. So a lot of this is going to be like, hey, maybe you should do the things for other people. Hey, maybe you should give to other people and worry about yourself later. And that is how you get the gain. If you just go, well, I need to worry about me because I got scarcity and blah, 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 you're going to just end up, it's going to be a lose-lose situation. So I'd really ask yourself, where can you, again, this is just an opposition. I think the other hard part about this is not being Sun in Libra about it, not being like, well, I guess I can't do anything about things for myself and it has to be about other people. Like, you don't need to go about it about that, but there is this sense of, the desire to connect and the desire for relationships, the desire for this peace and this fun is going to go at odds with the sense of just doing things for yourself. And so that's going to come into, question at this point. Some of you might need to be leaning more into other people. Some of you might need to be leaning more into yourself. That's for you to decide. But what gets really interesting is this moon goes opposite Mars here, where it gets very distracted, but then the moon will square Mercury and Neptune at the same time. Like, look, life, like, I can't stand when people say, when is the astrology going to get better? When is the astrology going to get better? As human beings, our whole brains are programmed to find problems. They are. That's just how it is. Why I'm saying that is this doesn't necessarily look like a problem, but this moon in Sag squaring Mercury, squaring Neptune, it's like, hey, look, you're not going to solve all of the problems right now. What can you do right now, though? Because I think of this moon in Sag, just like, well, I can do anything and I can do everything. And it's going to be squaring Mercury and squaring Neptune. It's like, well, I don't know how to fix this and I don't know how to do that. And it's just going to feel easy to give up. You don't want to give up. Don't do that. But just fucking focus on one thing that you can. Like, you don't have to solve all of your problems right now. Just take a baby step. That's all you got to do. And I think it's this moon in Sagittarius squares Mercury retrograde in Virgo and squares Neptune. I think you might feel a little bit confused, a little bit lost, a little bit overwhelmed at like, well, I want to do all these things and change all these things, but what's the right solution? What's the right thing? I'm not really sure where it's at. Calm down. Just calm down. This energy is best used for exploring options. Thinking outside the box. This isn't a day where you're going to be like, well, I have the solution. You're going to be challenged here with your thoughts and your beliefs, right? This moon and Sag excitement and passion for adventure in the future is going, like Mercury and Virgo is like, well, actually, you don't have the money and actually you don't have the time. And then the moon's going to square Neptune where it's like, oh, well, gosh, like, how am I going to do all of this? Just do one thing at a time. Again, this is constructive energy, I think, for thinking outside the box. It's good for thinking long term, but, rather than thinking long term and like what you want to do in 5 years, if you want to think that way, which I think is good for the moon and Sag, reverse engineer it. Because if you go, well, I have these big goals I want to be in 5 years, but how am I ever going to get there? Work yourself backwards. That's what a Mercury retrograde in Virgo is perfect for, is reverse engineering. I don't know why I've never thought of that or thought of saying that. But reverse engineer your steps to get there. And that's going to make it feel more tangible to get there. I just think the hard part is with the moon squaring Neptune. We might have an idea of, again, in the law of attraction, which, I have opinions about, but there's a really awesome thing that they talk about in the law of attraction. And that is, if you want to attract it and manifest it, this is something that manifesting people who are like, manifest everything, they don't talk about this. You have to create that feeling inside first. Like, what does it feel like to be loved? What does it feel like to be successful in the definition of what success is for you? You don't have to think of a job or an experience, but what does the feeling feel like? Because if you can muster up that feeling inside, that's going to give you much more clarity as to where to go. And I think this is much more of a feeling what that feels like, and not necessarily like, right brain or left brain or whatever it is, the more logical side, like thinking, oh, like this is the title I want and this is how I want things to be. Create the feeling inside. I think that's going to be the easiest thing to do here, because I think when you start thinking about the specifics, Mercury in retrograde and Virgo is a little bit overwhelmed. I think it'd be a greater time to reverse engineer your steps to get there. but do that by creating that feeling inside first. And then we get to Sunday. And on Sunday, that moon's going to go into Capricorn. It's going to square Jupiter and Venus. Mercury stations direct. Maybe a little bit of that reverse engineering provides a solution. Maybe a little bit of that reverse engineering gives you a plan. Something I love about, I love this for any Capricorn placement of like I'm a Jupiter in Capricorn, so I'm like, I need a plan. But with the moon going into Capricorn, I say this all the time, it's a great time to detach from the emotions and just get some work done. There's nothing better than work. That is not to say, like some people are like, work is horrible, work is bad. Work is a gift. Like some of you think that you love Saturn so much, but like, I hate work. You think Saturn likes you to hear that? No. The moon going into Capricorn is a time to just, hey, like for example, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again because I just got done with 2 awesome clients today. I love doing client readings. Yes, I get to help people and that's great, but really, and this is kind of selfish, but this is true. I love helping people because for an hour and a half, whatever it is, I get to spend an hour not worried about my feelings and just helping someone else, being there for them. And I look at that as a very moon in Capricorn thing. I'm detaching from myself and my issues and just focusing on what's in front of me. And that's what I think is powerful about the moon going into Capricorn and just the moon in Capricorn in general. Whoops, this is the right chart. The only thing is the moon goes into Capricorn and it's going to square Jupiter and Venus. So this is where it kind of going back to that analogy I've been using the past couple of weeks of like litigation and things like that. This is where there might be like a problem set in with that. The moon in Capricorn is like, this isn't necessarily like, it might be more emotionally exhausting if you get your emotions involved into it. But as the moon in Capricorn squares Venus and Libra, it feels a little cheap. Like, oh, that's not what I want to do. And then the moon squares Jupiter and Aries where it's like, that's too much. That's too big. So I think about Sunday is like I said before, it's a good day to make a plan. But I think on this day is about, I don't want to say consolidating, but I can't think of the right word. I would like to know in the comments below what word I should use here. But this idea of like, Venus and Libra, Jupiter and Aries, you're just, not everything's going to be perfect right then and there. And it's not necessarily about doing what's necessarily like right in front of you, but like, how can you, what is that word in relationships and in everything else? Compromise. That's what I'm thinking of. As the moon squares Venus and Jupiter, there's got to be some compromise. Like, what can you do right now? The moon's fallen in Capricorn, right? Again, nothing's going to happen overnight, but there is something that you can do right in front of you. And it might be a little bit of a compromise, but guess what? In life, we got to compromise. In life, we have to, again, and what I love about this is that this is Libra season. Compromising comes way easier in Libra season than in Leo season, where it's like, no, I'm not compromising. Compromise. Overcome it. Provide a solution. Make it easy. Don't be like, oh, well, this isn't going to work, so now it's not going perfect. Just find a compromise. Find a reasonable solution. Make it very moon in Capricorn. It's very black and white. It's very simple. You don't have to overthink it. But I think the other thing on Sunday is I think it's a great time, again, get the work done, get the actions done. This is now, again, a waxing moon. It's a quarter phase. It's going to be connecting to both benefics. I think this is an excellent day to get a lot done. There might be some compromise, but I think in that compromise, if you find the solution will be more important than the idea of what you wanted in your head will be. And that's this week. Oh, and Mercury stations direct. Let me actually talk about that. And this is what I love is like, finally we get to this point of like, okay, a solution is clear. We've got the paperwork. We've got the clear understanding. We know what the facts are. We have a plan. Now we can finally start moving forward. So I think on Sunday, it might take a little bit of compromise, but this is the solution. Mercury's direct now. This is it. Deal with it. And I'm not saying that in a bad way at all. I'm saying that as like, it might challenge you to like compromising is a challenge, especially when Jupiter's in Aries and like, I want it all. And Venus is in Libra and the other person's like, well, I want it all too. Find a way to compromise. I think with Mercury stationing direct in Virgo, there's no more information to be given. There's no more things to rethink or go over. It's very clear what has to be done now. And it's just whether or not you're willing to do that. But that's this week. We jump into next week. Not a lot going on. Just the full moon in Aries. I will say that the full moon in Aries is, something to look forward to. I like full moons, but this is not necessarily like, next week's not that big. which is good. I like to think that non-major astrology event weeks are good because that might give you some more time to think, more space to kind of work through things, more space to come up with ideas and plans and inspirations and things like that. So I think a lot of this week is just like, hey, this is all stuff that we knew what was coming, right? We knew Mercury was stationing direct. We knew that this Mercury was going to conjoin Venus. We knew Venus was going to go into Libra. So just do the things that were already kind of set up for you to do. And then after that, it's just kind of like, as we get into next week, it's really just kind of like letting new things come in. So I guess as final thoughts, I mean, kind of went in on this one, to be honest with you guys. Kind of proud of myself on this one. I think the Moon in Scorpio transit and the Mars trine Saturn is an excellent time to really do something extremely constructive and supportive. At the same time, using that experience as like you want to be deep in an experience. Like, why would you, like, don't let that moment go to waste. Use that moment. You know what I mean? I remember, it's funny. I sleep on the floor now because I'm looking at the floor I sleep on, because it's for health reasons and a bunch of other stuff. But a long time ago, I still have this picture of when I had to throw away like almost everything I owned because and I've told this story before, I got bed bugs in my apartment and I was like subleasing it and I wasn't supposed to, so they wouldn't do anything. And I was so poor. Like literally all I had was cigarettes for dinner, and they were like rolled up cigarettes from loose tobacco that we would find. They weren't no like nice Camels or nothing. And I still have that picture, and that picture motivates me a lot because I remember what it felt like to feel like I had nothing and to feel like I was at the bottom and to feel like that there was no hope. And I use that as a motive. I use that feeling as emotional motivation for what I do now, because I don't ever want to go back to that feeling. And I think a lot of that this week is doing those hard things and putting the emotional investment into it, not just being like, oh, things were hard, whatever. Like the meaning, like what meaning you ascribe or subscribe to things, what meaning you put onto things is what makes your life. What meaning are you attaching to your actions this week? Because I think if you really put in if you're really doing the work and you really actually attach some meaning into it and you actually ask, why am I doing this? Why is it this way? I think you're going to get a much better return on investment. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys. I'll be seeing you next week.